Asian economies are reeling after U.S. President Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs on Mexico and Canada and China over the weekend, sparking a trade war. Major stock markets from Japan to South Korea were all mired in the red today, with Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index closing flat after being down more than 2% for the day. The hardest hit was Taiwan's TAIEX, which lost 3.5%. Taiwan is heavily dependent on global trade for its electronics exports. The local PSE index looks like an outlier as it closed up by 0.3% today, but actually, it already crashed into bear market territory last Friday after that disappointing GDP report. The peso took a beating as well, weakening to 58.66 to $1, less than 1 peso short of its all-time low. Analysts say the currency is being dragged down by weak macroeconomic data, as well as expectations that the US dollar will keep strengthening on Trump's protectionist policies. So far, no one is yet forecasting that the peso will hit 60 to the greenback. And Trump has admitted that his tariffs will cause some short-term pain for Americans. After all, 3 countries, Canada, Mexico, and China, announced retaliatory tariffs right after he announced it. Trump said he would meet with the leaders of Canada and Mexico today, but downplayed expectations that he will change his mind. Under his executive order, the U.S. will be slapping 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico and 10% on those coming from China. Trump also says that he will definitely impose tariffs on the European Union or on the EU as well, but he didn't say when.
How will this trade war affect the rest of the world and the Philippines is another big question. For some answers, let's bring in JC Punongbayan. He's Associate Professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics. We're glad to have you join us again, JC, because nabitin kami with our conversation last week. And now there's another big thing to talk about, which is this trade war that was sparked over the weekend. Of course, the Philippines is not a huge exporter, and so we probably, won't see immediate impact. But how do you see this playing out for an import-reliant country like the Philippines?
Thank you, Gretchen, Regina, and Sean, for having me back again. So this is really quite disturbing, and we're less than 2 weeks into the second Trump administration, but already we're seeing the signs of a massive trade war looming ahead of us. 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on imports from China. This is really quite sad because for many decades, the US has been a leading advocate of free trade globally, but that has seen a major reversal in the 2 Trump administrations. And I'm afraid that the US economy will suffer, and not just the countries that Trump is railing against, Canada and Mexico and China, but the US as well. And many Americans don't realize that by imposing such huge tariffs on imports coming from these countries, the American consumer will end up paying for all of that. Now, as for the Philippines, the US actually turns out to be the best destination of our exports. But so far, there are no indications that Trump is going to impose large tariffs on the Philippines. We're not quite on his radar just yet, but it remains a risk moving forward.
JC, have we seen this kind of a trade war in the past? And what is the effect globally of huge changes in tariffs, such as 25%? U.S. is a global leader in terms of the economy. What would the impacts, or how would we feel the immediate impacts, you think?
Well, I think we should expect many think tanks and multilateral organizations to forecast global economic trade to slow down this year because of steep increase in tariffs. This is not the first time that the U.S. has embarked on such a trade war, but for decades, again, the U.S. has actually learned its lessons. It's not just the smaller countries that are going to suffer, but consumers as well and the American economy. But I don't think that Trump realizes that. And I think there's a survey recently showing that less than half of the US population actually knows what the tariff is in the first place. So it's a really sad state of affairs. and we're going to feel the pinch in one way or another.
Outside the posturing, what do you think the goal of Trump is? I mean, I've been watching several reports, and the American businesses say there is no other source of goods. Like, for example, they get a lot of imports from China. They sell it to the American market, and they don't have other sources that would be competitive inside the United States. I mean, what do you think is he trying to achieve here?
Well, I think, Gretchen, one of the main narratives is that Trump touts tariffs as a way to punish, quote unquote, punish many other countries that have, again, quote unquote, stolen American jobs and really put down the US economy. But again, this comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of protectionism, tariffs, and global trade. And I'm afraid that this time around, the Republicans surrounding Trump are really quite organized, and there are no strong voices in the opposition, or at least among his cabinet, that are warning him about the major fallout from this protectionist wave. So I think that's the main source, or that's the main line in his narrative, a way to punish other countries and put the U.S. again as the top country of the world, or assert its power in the world.
JC, I would tend to agree with you because just listening to the amount, like 25% with Canada, who is like the biggest trading partner of 36 states, I think. Mexico, their biggest trading partner, and of course China, who everyone gets raw materials from. It would sound like, did nobody brief him on this? So do you think that there's a chance that he could walk back on this, because that's the same thing to do?
Actually, I have many relatives who voted for Trump, and they're completely in line with, yeah, actually some even very close relatives. But I think some Americans need to feel the pain to learn the lessons the hard way, I guess. And the sad thing is that actually Canada and Mexico have been pushed to the wall and are now planning to set up retaliatory tariffs. So this is similar to what had happened back during the first Trump administration, where there was a raging trade war between the US and China. But now it's the US versus Canada and Mexico and China. But unfortunately, of course, these smaller economies will want to assert themselves, that there are no pushovers given the bullying of the US. But I'm afraid that the retaliatory tariffs will also hurt them at the same time that it hurts the US. So again, this points to the overall lesson that nobody really wins in a trade war, but I don't think many Americans realize the coming implications.
Okay, since Justin Trudeau was the most specific so far as of this airing, what did you think of his quote-unquote retaliation? And what are the possible impacts of that if he does, like, pag tinuloy niya yung kanyang threat?
Well, I think we should observe the retaliatory tariffs or strategies of these other countries. In the case of Canada, I think one major leverage on their part is that much of the oil that is imported by the US actually comes from Canada. But Justin Trudeau has stopped short of pulling in the big guns and actually halting all exports of oil to the US. But I think that's a major bargaining chip on their end. Now, as for Mexico, I think they have a totally different strategy when it comes to this. They are planning retaliatory tariffs, but I think it's on different commodities, and I think there's an angle about the drug cartels and the drug issue surrounding the US-Mexico border. So it's going to be different strategies depending on the leadership in these countries that the US is attacking.
But JC, the big question, albeit in the probably medium to longer term, is whether all of this will worsen inflation in the Philippines, right? By way of messing up the supply chains, just like how we saw and painfully lived through during the COVID pandemic. Again, we may not be a country in the line of sight of President Trump, but we are heavily reliant on imports. And then secondary to that, I don't know if you caught our conversation earlier with the PCCI Director Guerrero, but then there's other issues around, right? The fact that the price of rice has remained stubbornly high despite the tariff cut, and also the fact that there is a very persistent bill in Congress right now pushing for the 100 peso wage hike. Sorry, 200 peso daily wage hike, not 100 peso. All of these combined, again, these are what we call in economics dark clouds on the horizon. But what are you seeing? Talk us through some silver lining here.
I hate to share some silver lining when I myself can't see it, but I think we're not going to expect so much inflation to arise from the uh, uh, emerging trade war between the U.S. and other countries. The factors behind inflation in the Philippines are really quite different. Rice, for example, has a disproportionate impact on domestic inflation. And we saw in the last couple of months that at least before inflation went on the downtrend, almost half of inflation was due to rice, and much of that was due to rice as a specific commodity. So it's really quite important for us to get a rice policy right. And then as for the possible inflationary impact of the 200 peso daily wage hike, this is much larger compared to the previous proposals of daily wage hikes. And of course, entrepreneurs, the business sector will push back on it hard. But let's see where it will bring us.
Uh, what do you think? I'd hate to capitalize on other people's misery or what's happening, the dark clouds over them. But what opportunities do you see here for the Philippines as probably an export market? Because we do know we are a net importing market. Maybe we could send some products over to the West, or we could be possibly a source for raw materials. I mean, thinking along those lines, what opportunities do we see here for the Philippines?
Well, a long time problem, Gretchen, in the Philippines is that our trading sector is not very diversified. So when you look at the main exports of the Philippines, which is semiconductors, integrated chips, these are also our biggest imports. And this has been a stylized fact for many, many years. So what that means is that we're bringing in not raw materials, but intermediate goods. So you can imagine the chips coming into the Philippines. We assemble them a bit and then export them again outside of the country. But we're not quite able to produce smartphones, iPhones, MacBooks, laptops, etc., to the extent that Vietnam can, for example. So I think that's one major problem of trying to strengthen the Philippine economy when we are not able to introduce high value added to many of our exports. And we continue to export many goods, agricultural commodities like coconut, mangoes, etc., that have inherently low value added. So I think this is one of the major challenges moving forward. How do we emulate or copy the success of surrounding economies such as Vietnam that has been able to diversify its exports quite significantly in the past couple of decades? If we're not able to do that, then I'm afraid that the Philippine economy will continue to lag behind many ASEAN economies in the coming years.
The thing is, though, JC, I mean, if you're gonna take it to, like that argument, our system is just completely different from most of our ASEAN peers. And how do we even try to accomplish that economically when politically we are like so different? Right, it would be much harder to, just for someone to put their foot down and say, do this, do that. It has to be like this.
Well, I don't think, Sean, that it's impossible for the Philippines to grow quite fast in the coming decades. But I think what's important is that we're able to attract many foreign direct investments that can boost domestic manufacturing and diversify our exports. For example, in the early 2000s, Vietnam was able to attract many multilateral companies such as Samsung, Apple into its shores. And by doing so, they have been able to produce significantly more jobs, high paying jobs in manufacturing and industry. And I think that's one of the keys to success moving forward for the Philippines. However, for many reasons, like the weak rule of law, the lack of proper infrastructure, the high cost of power, etc., many possible or prospective investors are choosing to locate outside of the Philippines into India or Vietnam and not in the Philippines. So I think again that points to the necessity for the Philippine government to find ways to make the Philippines a lot more attractive for these foreign investors, because we should accept the fact that there's not enough saving in the Philippines. We can't expect to produce or to generate or make multinational companies with the same success as Samsung or Apple coming only from our shores. We need the help of these foreign investments in order to accelerate Philippine growth in the future. But the sad reality is that we're not able to attract them and they're going elsewhere.
And in that vein, actually, I saw your Facebook post over the weekend showing that the Philippines is now on a permanently lower GDP path. You're saying basically COVID, the pandemic scarred the economy permanently. Talk us through that quickly, JC. What are you seeing? We've got about a minute.
Yes, the reality is that many other economies have been able to go back to their pre-pandemic trajectories. But the Philippines now seems to be on a totally different plane or horizon. And for us to go back to the pre-pandemic trajectory by the end of the Marcos administration, I crunched the numbers, and we will need annual growth of about 11.4%, which is more than twice the growth rate that we saw for 2024. So basically, that's impossible. And I think this is emerging or turning out to be one of the major economic legacies of the Marcos administration. Despite promises of going back to the pre-pandemic trajectory, we're not able to do that until 2028. So that will have to happen after the Marcos administration, which is quite sad because that means that we will continue to lag behind many of our more successful ASEAN neighbors.
Wow, that's such a sobering and somber assessment. But
Sorry.
no, but thank you for crunching the
needed that.
numbers.
I tend to do that.
Thank you for crunching the numbers. We have something to go by now. Every quarter, when we talk to the economic managers, they'll say 5.2% is still amongst the fastest in Southeast Asia. But look, we would actually need 11%, upwards of 11%, as you said.
11.4% to be
Eleven
exact.
point 4%.
I
That
do
won't
remember
cut it.
the president saying in his State of the Nation address, the economy is sound. It does not
That's right.
look like it is at
Thank,
this point.
thank you so much for your assessment and insights, as always. Professor J.C. Punongbayan of the UP School of Economics. We'll leave it there for now.